Good morning. Welcome to the BFG and Podcast Abundance webinar on why advisors should podcast. Virginia Elder is our guest, and I'm hers as well. Virginia, you want to introduce yourself to the crew so that they know what a pro you are at this?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm Virginia Elder, the owner of Podcast Abundance. We're a podcast production company. We focus on video first podcasting. So thanks for having me, Eric.
My pleasure, and I'm so excited to be doing this with you. I have been podcasting now for 6 years, and have been a financial advisor for 32. And so I'm excited to share some personal stories about why financial advisors should be podcasting, why it's an important medium, why it's important for turning authority into influence. I'm the CEO
Mhm.
of BFG Financial Advisors in suburban Maryland, and just excited to be here with you. So I think we should dive in.
Yeah,
Um,
ready to
and,
go.
and before we do, Hannah Dennis is in the background. If anyone has questions during the show, you can go into the chat box on the bottom right of your screen. You can ask us a question. If it's pertains to a specific slide, Hannah might interrupt us, which she loves to do. If not, we'll hold questions till the end, and we'll make sure there's plenty of time to have all your questions answered. So, with that, Virginia, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first thing that comes to mind when most people think about starting a podcast is like, how am I going to fit this into my schedule? I've already got calls to make and client meetings, and adding this marketing thing on feels like extra work. So, the top way to combat that feeling and pressure to your schedule is, of course, to just batch create your content. So, what that means is recording several episodes back to back, 1 day or 2 days per month. Uh-oh, we lost our slides.
We did.
And so, 1 or 2 days per month, you're
Oh my
focused
God, we are
on.
talking to a raccoon at the moment.
We are. He's welcome to join. I mean,
I'm
if he
gonna
has
stop
any
sharing my
questions.
screen until I can fix this.
Oh,
So you guys
all
keep
right.
going,
We
and I will
will.
be back on in a moment.
Okay,
Wow. All right. Here we
no
go.
problem. I mean, I'm happy to talk about batching without
N-
the
No
slide.
and raccoons love to podcast, I find. So that's fine. It's a perfect target audience. We'll be fine.
Well, they love to like get in your, trash or whatever outside and drive your dogs nuts so that while you're
All right.
recording, you're barking in the background.
Well, this is starting out so auspiciously. So let's talk about batching content and how you can make time for this, because as financial advisors, we're busy humans, and
Exactly.
sometimes this doesn't feel like marketing doesn't feel like the first thing that comes to mind.
Right, right. So when you look at your schedule, of course, you're always wanting to plan ahead. You've got people booking meetings with you, you've got conferences to attend, and you want to be able to look ahead a month or 2 months and go ahead and book your recording days and block those off. Then on those recording days, whatever style you're doing, whether it's just a solo episode, those tend to be easier to schedule because you don't have to coordinate with anybody. But if you're doing interviews or some type of round table, you want to make sure your guests are able to join with you on that date. And that kind of leads into the content calendar piece where, you're looking ahead. You're thinking, what am I going to talk about when? Is it based on the season? Is it based on, the fact that we just had a whole bunch of client meetings and I heard this theme throughout when I was speaking to my clients. And so you want to plan out your marketing ahead of time, and that can theme so easily with what you're also going to talk about on the podcast so that it's easy. You're kind of on the same topic. You can be using video like this and chop it into reels and put those on Instagram or, LinkedIn, right? That's where we're all hanging out these days. So there's just so much you can do. Maintaining focus, recording back to back in a single day or 2 days a month just to batch it all together. And then, boom, you have your podcast recorded, you have video recorded that, someone in your office or, a provider can slice up so that you can use it for social media. You have so much that you can use by focusing those efforts into just a couple of recording days. So that's what I do too. And I'm not even an advisor.
Well, you've been an advisor to many advisors, though, and I will tell you, having done podcasts as a big piece of our not only our marketing but of our business development and of our messaging and so forth. What I have found is, first of all, it becomes part of our routine. Second
Mhm.
of all, it is a wonderful way to create new relationships with not only the audience, which grows over time, and it takes a while. I mean, this is not linear; it's exponential. It takes a while. You really need to do it, and then it also is a way to build relationships if you have a guested show with your
Mhm.
guests, and they become centers of influence and strategic alliances, and there's ways of where, and you can do reciprocal podcasts where you guest on other people's shows and host them on yours. So there's a lot of business opportunities there. The ROI is extraordinary, at least it has been for us. It's hard to measure though, because sometimes it's 2 and 3 degrees
Mhm.
of separation that open various doors. One thing I will say is that when you do a podcast, if you're a financial advisor, please don't quit your day job. I'm not a podcaster. I'm a financial advisor with a podcast. Hire
Right.
professionals. Today's webinar is being brought to you by our financial advisory office, which is why we just had all kinds of weird snafus to begin with. When you hire a professional in podcasting, you have a dedicated studio link and everything else, and so obviously this was just a test to make sure everyone was paying attention to why you hire professionals to produce and design podcasts. So let's move on to our next topic. The
Yeah.
next topic is really about influence. All financial advisors have authority. You're an authority the day you get your licenses, the day you get your registrations. Maybe you earn your CFP or other types of designations. And when you do that, you already know more about financial advising and money and markets and those things than the vast majority of the public. So you're an authority on your subject once you have some base education and have begun your career, but nobody generally will know what you have to say unless you have a platform to say it. And many years ago, that was about doing seminars. And seminars are very expensive. You have to fill a room, you have to reserve a room, you have to feed people. Yeah, there's this enormous spend on seminar marketing, and most businesses have gone away from that because of the expense. And of course, that means going to things like Zooms. Well, the
Mhm.
challenges with just doing a Zoom is that you're at the mercy of everyone's technology. And
Mhm.
we certainly don't want that to happen. So, creating a podcast has allowed us to create influence in our industry. It's allowed us to have a voice. It's allowed us to invite other people to share their voices with the world. And we've had listeners literally all over the globe, Australia, China, all over North America. It's unbelievable. And what I would say is that now, having done this enough time, none of us have to be professional podcasters. We don't. I am not a professional podcaster. I'm a financial advisor, but the influence created by going on other people's shows and doing guesting as well as hosting on our own, it helps promote the things we're doing, whether it's writing books or doing articles or hosting various events or just simply doing great work for clients. Sometimes it's having the right guests on who can talk about things that we don't do every day. You're having guests on that can talk about real estate or talk about insurance or talk about taxes, or better yet, just tell their stories. The premise of don't retire, graduate is that retirement's terrible for you and no one should do it. And so we talk a lot about what do we want to be when we grow up. Well, that's not a technical topic. People don't tune into podcasts because they want to hear tax law. They tune into podcasts because they want to relate to somebody and tell stories. And so the way to become an influencer is to create regular content that's relatable and authentic, and that allows you to reach people you might not otherwise know. You have anything else on that, Virginia, in terms of the ways in which influencing can cross over from podcasting? I'm sure you have a bunch.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Of course, it really helps humanize you as an advisor. Think about it, I kind of group financial professionals, medical professionals, attorneys, all of these high profile professions. The general public feels this gap between you and them. You know everything. It's a little bit intimidating. I'm scared to bring my issues to the table, right? That's kind of how they perceive all of these professions. And so, being a financial advisor, podcasting is an excellent way just to, you know, ex- explore your own voice, share who you truly are as a person and your perspectives on things. And it doesn't need to be a personal show, but even when you talk about financial topics from your perspective, you are humanizing yourself. And that is a great way to break down barriers between you and potential clients. And, of course, that elevates your influence. So I think it's a great tool to use as far as your marketing.
Well, and I think podcast episodes are evergreen, so they're useful forever. I mean,
Mhm.
you can use video clips, you can use audio clips, you can create social media posts and followings. You can piggyback them into blog entries or other types of marketing that'll reach different people different ways because not everyone likes to take in their media the same way. Some people prefer to listen, some people prefer to watch, some people prefer to read, some people it's some combination. And so in trying to reach the correct audience, you need to know that your topic is of interest to them, but then you also have to know how to reach them and where they are. And
Yeah.
starting a podcast is daunting. There are millions of podcasts, millions.
Right.
And so separating yourself and creating something that's not going to be a flash in the pan where you did 3 episodes and disappeared and you're just on a catalog somewhere, but you actually create a show and create a brand. I would think that's also super important, being consistent, right?
hmm Well, and you bring up a good point about the evergreen feature of podcasting. So if you want to talk about, current news, current, happenings in the market, current tax law, current
Mm,
whatever is of interest to you, yeah, those are going to be more timely episodes that need to be published by a certain date. There's a little bit of
yeah.
pressure around the marketing of those episodes because laws change, rules change, the
Yeah.
markets change, right? So the evergreen term that you're
Hmm.
mentioning here is more about like the general positive practices of personal finance. And those are pieces that, yeah, of course, even just what we're doing here today, someone could come in and take clips out of this and they really could be used forever because the advice is the same. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of something in people's heads as well is either on one hand, am I ever going to run out of things to talk about? Or on the other hand, I just say the same thing to everyone and I'm kind of tired of saying the same thing. And so a podcast is a great way to say it once, have a recording. And when someone asks you a question, you can say, you know what? I have an episode about that. Let me send you the link. And it's a great
Yeah.
way to um, elevate your influence because they're thinking like, oh wow, you know, they had all this material already prepared for me. I feel so special. Like I can't wait to
Right.
listen. So it's a great tool.
Yeah, it is. And I have done live television and I've done radio and done some advertising and tried lots of different media outlets. And none of those created business for us. I mean, absolutely
Mm,
none. I would have people recognize me in the neighborhood bagel shop from TV. Oh, you're that guy. But no one that didn't create action because people aren't watching Sunday morning news because they're interested in financial stuff. They want to know what the weather is, who won the game. Maybe they want breaking news. Our podcasts are not breaking news. We are not going to compete with the giant worldwide outlets that are breaking something. That's not what this is about. It's about being educational, entertaining. It's got to be fun, or people just generally aren't going to listen to it. It's got to be fun, and just being relatable. So let's
mm,
move on to our next topic because we've talked
yeah.
about influencing, but let's talk about trust because I don't know of any word that's more important to a financial advisor than
Mhm.
trust because you're talking about things that are as intimate, really, as medicine.
Right. Yeah, and the biggest thing, I mentioned it earlier, is you're breaking down barriers between you and the people who potentially would be coming to you for business.
Mhm.
And, that distance between the two of you gets shortened the more that they see your face, the more they hear your voice. Even before podcasts, we're all going to video. Like there's a new study that came out, it's like 60%, 60 something percent of people are just, audio, video. They don't care which, they consume both. It's really spreading across the market. But even like 10 years ago, a piece of my personal story is that I found personal finance podcasts, absolutely fell in love with them. They helped me uh, pretty much avoid filing bankruptcy, getting out of
Mm.
debt. I think it was 3.5 years. We paid off $80,000 of debt just from
Wow.
listening. There was no video back then, just listening. I would drive to work every day, just binging, a few different advisors that were on
Mm.
podcasts that I learned to trust over time and took their advice and took action in my own life. And so, real people, normal people out there. And of course, I wasn't in podcasting back then. I was in audit at a, you know, tax firm here. So, all walks of life, all types of people can stumble across a show and begin to trust you. A big piece of that is your audio quality, the
Mhm.
consistency that you publish episodes, and then we already talked about humanizing your financial expertise. So, audio quality isn't actually that tough to get. This is a $70 microphone. I'm in my home office. Yes, I've done things around the room to, somewhat help with echo and things like that. But I think you saw my dog walk in. Like, there's just normal things that are going on, but I can still have great audio. I don't record when the kids are home. I don't record when the lawn guys are
Mm.
here. There's different uh, simple moves that you can
Yeah.
make in your office. And Eric's even set up a studio in his office. So it doesn't have to be rocket science. There's just some simple guidance, a couple of microphone recommendations, camera recommendation. It doesn't have to be a big deal. And then batching your recordings will really help with that consistency. Because if you can get 5 episodes recorded in a month between 1 to 2 days of recording, you've got a month of content. So if you're thinking and planning ahead and you're able to batch that content, that'll just really help with the consistency of your publish. And I do recommend every other week or every week if you can. I've had a few people come to me and say, "Oh, I'm thinking about like once a month podcast." I'm like, "That's great because you're creating something." However, you're not going to get the traction that you want with a slow go like that. You do
Yeah.
need, twice a month, every other week, something like that, just to try to get some traction. And weekly is definitely the best option.
We put new content out every Thursday morning. And I get excited because I know that it's going to generate not only some communication and some social media buzz and some other things, but that I know I've reached the people who are counting on us every week. And we do have a lot of repeat listeners. We have a growing audience, which is super fun to sort of track. No one's confusing me with Joe Rogan at the moment, but I'm not reaching millions of people every time I say something. But the nice thing about podcasts is people are tuning in because they're interested in you and in what you have
Mhm.
to say. There's so many podcasts and they're so specific that if your message resonates with someone, they tend to be extremely loyal listeners because they find, like you did, where you found two or
Mhm.
three maybe, and you said, these are the folks I'm going to listen to. These are the folks who I identify with. They're going to be my virtual accountability partners to help me
Mhm.
through a tough time in my financial life. Um, the audio quality, I did build a studio, and by building a studio, I spent almost nothing. We did a little bit of soundproofing. We got some very inexpensive equipment. Um, if this looks professional, then we've done our job. But at the end of the day, this is a small office in the back where hopefully no one is trampling around and we're not hearing a lot of background noise. But outside of that, it doesn't have to be expensive. I have the ability to podcast from my home. I have ability to podcast on the road if I choose. I mean, it's not super huge, heavy equipment, and so you can be consistent. And you talk about batching. I tend to record no more than 2 or 3 episodes in a sitting,
Mhm.
partly because you want to stay fresh. You want to have energy. You want to make sure that, and people can tell if it's the third one and you're starting to sound a little like that, that's going to be sleepy and put people, to sleep. But if you're enthusiastic about what you're talking about and you can keep that energy without wildly over
Mhm.
caffeinating, of course, I'm not recommending that. But if you can do those things, then your energy level is consistent, your voice is consistent, your messaging is consistent. The audio quality, I think, is extremely easy. The
Mhm.
consistency matters. We started our show as a school theme show where I
Mm.
was planning to not release shows in the summer. It was going to be sort of summer vacation from the show, and that was done on purpose. I thought it was creative. It was also done because it felt expedient to from a budgetary standpoint to do slightly fewer episodes. But what happens is people forget you; they move on to the next thing. And
Mhm.
so when you said it needs to be consistent, it needs to be consistent. So then we went to every other week, and every other week was good, and now we're every week, and we're alternating weeks between what is a guested show and what is a show that's more, for a number of years, was more monologue where we would do Q&A,
Mhm.
and that was a lot of fun. But the guested shows do better. They have
Mhm.
a greater reach, a greater, partly because the guest shares with their audience that they were on the show. So
Yeah.
remember that every time you have a show and you bring a guest on, whoever it is, that guest should be very, very proud of having participated. They should be wanting to share their expertise with people. They're going to share their show so that your audience just multiplied, because it's not just your content, your contact list, it's their contact list.
Yeah.
So I do think that becomes exponential. Anything else on a face, voice, and likeness? I mean, this is me, no makeup, no filter. This is all
Well,
natural.
I have makeup on. Sorry, y'all.
Well, listen,
For women,
I
there's a different level of what requirement, I think, socially. So sometimes
okay.
that can be a challenge.
Well, this is all natural, for the record,
There we go.
in case you're keeping score at home. So
Yeah.
we started talking about this already, and that is the audience that you can reach in podcasting. First of all, it goes well beyond where financial advisors started. I started
Mhm.
32 years ago. It was local. It was, you were working your local chamber of commerce or your local alumni associations or your local business organizations, and it was shaking hands and having lunch and being physically present with people locally. There was no email, there was no internet. Blast faxing was not particularly useful, and so I'm going back to what feels like medieval times, but really your audience had a small radius.
Mhm.
As that technology increased, the radius grew, and it created new challenges for financial advisors, including being licensed in multiple states, including reaching and having an audience where you could meet essentially by phone. Remember this: there was no Zoom, there was no cameras at that point, and so it was a relationship that usually started in person. So even if someone was a remote client, it started in person. And you fast forward to today. You mentioned LinkedIn, which frankly, I'm on LinkedIn every single day because there's so many opportunities there. I use it all the time. And one of
Mhm.
those opportunities is just connecting with people where there's overlap, there's Venn diagram, there's opportunities.
Mhm.
And sometimes I use LinkedIn to find guests for the podcast because, number one, they have something to say that I know our audience will enjoy. And number two, I'd like to access their audience.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
reason I'm doing this with you, Virginia, it's not altruistic. You have a massive audience of followers. I'm trying to plug in.
Exactly. Same, same. And that's the wonderful part of podcasting is you can strategically find partners that you want to share an episode with on purpose because they have an audience, because they have a certain expertise, and your talents will overlap or your personalities overlap. Maybe it's just somebody you have a great time with and you know this is going to be a hilarious episode, right? So there are
Hmm.
lots of strategies you can use to decide who your guests are going to be, decide your um, publishing, guesting frequency. There are no rules in podcasting. So I know you operate under a lot of rules
I was about to
during
say
the
we've
day.
got some rules. We've got some rules even on podcasting. We can talk about the compliance end of it because that is
Yeah, and
something financial
I want to
advisors
get
ask.
to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I want
absolutely.
to get to that. Where I'm thinking about the rules that don't exist are
Mm.
your structure, your frequency. the
Yes.
style of show you do. If you want to have a game segment, if you want to do interviews or you don't, you want to do segments where you just include snippets from people. Like there are so many opportunities. You can almost dream up a style of show and have it made. So, as far as how you create what you create, there's no rules. I do want to get to the compliance piece though, because I know that's a
Yes.
question in the back of every advisor's mind when it comes to
Without question.
podcasting.
Correct.
I've even had people say, like, oh, advisors aren't allowed to have podcasts. What are you talking about? Like, I'm a crazy woman. But
Well, if
you
the shoe
have
fits.
found a way, and I
Yeah.
would love to hear a little bit about that.
All of our episodes are submitted to the compliance department where we need to have content reviewed. We've never had an episode that we couldn't air. And some of that is just as a financial advisor, knowing what the third rails are, knowing what not to say, knowing the difference between information and advice.
Mhm.
For us to make recommendations on a podcast would be malpractice. We'd be in trouble. But for us to talk about strategies, you can talk about debt reduction strategies without naming the bank you think someone should use, for example. You can talk about investment strategies without talking about the stock or the fund or the investment someone should buy. And so it really is about strategy. It's about life. It's about stories. It's about how to think about finance. It's not about financial advice. If people are tuning to our show for specific advice for them, they'll be sadly disappointed because we, first of all, don't know who they are necessarily, and second of all, that we can't do that. That's
Right.
no doctor is going to be handing out prescriptions without doing an evaluation first. So if you avoid the big no-nos, and we all know what they are,
Yeah.
if you're even questioning, can I say that? Don't say it. I mean, that it's that simple. And we're not short on content. We've done over 200 episodes, and there's no shortage of things you can talk about, people you can talk to, the topics you can address, some of which are extremely personal, some of which are a little more technical. But
Mhm.
our compliance department has been phenomenal. And if you're a financial advisor and your compliance department is telling you you can't do a podcast, they're not telling you you're not allowed to podcast as an advisor. They're telling you they don't want to review your podcast and they're not willing to accept that. And that makes it hard for you. And you have to make business decisions around, is this a compliance department I can continue to work with based on where I want to be and what I want to do in my career? If it's important for you to do
Mhm.
media, you need to work with a firm that's going to understand and allow and help you do media. Don't tell you what you can't do, tell you how to do what you can do compliantly. And that to me is the difference.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, being the post production expert on plenty of advisory shows, we've submitted tons of episodes, probably thousands at this point, through compliance. And I'm with you. We've never been told we can't air an episode. We've been asked to remove a sentence. We've been
Really?
asked to remove a question and answer series because there wasn't like a really good cut for that specific topic or question. But in the end, those episodes aired and they were fantastic.
Yeah.
So when you have a team working on this behind the scenes, there are changes that can be made and it still be a wonderful episode, even if you get compliance pushback. So I would say, don't worry about it as much as you initially were inclined to, because there has to be a way. It's like Eric said, how can we make this happen instead of, no, you can't do that. Okay, but how can we? Like
Well,
there's a
and
little bit of a conversation and
yes.
maybe some friendliness or persuasion that might go on between you and your compliance officer.
Yes, I think my child has learned that where should we get ice cream is a better question than can we get ice cream, because it's
Yes.
not a yes no question. So some of it's just asking the right question the right way. I'll also say that the one thing compliance officers sometimes will be faced with is they'll ask you for a script.
Hmm.
There's no script. I don't
Hmm.
know what the guest is going to say. I don't. It's just a conversation. And so,
Mhm.
and even today, I don't know if Virginia is going to go rogue and say some crazy things or not. I hope not. I suspect not, although, stranger things have happened. But the reality is that there is no script. We don't know how it's going to go. And if there was a script, no one would be particularly interested in that. You'll notice that these slides, no one's reading things to you, even in a webinar format. No one wants to hear that. No one wants to see that. If it's something you could read, print it and read it, another time. But this has to be unscripted and it has to be real
Yeah.
to me to be good. So let's move on. We talked about the audience. Let's talk about brand awareness. And you're probably, without a doubt, more of an expert on brand awareness than I am. I understand brand awareness in the financial space, so I'll speak to that,
Mhm.
and then you can correct all of my guffaws. Um, Brand awareness in the financial space is difficult because we all sound the same. And so
Mm.
if there's 50 financial advisors watching this video, I encourage you to go through an exercise, have one of your team members or your staff print the text from the homepage of a website for 10 other firms, and then put them in front of you and see if you can identify your own. I know that sounds
Mhm.
absurd, but we all sound the same. It's the same blah, blah, blah. It's like Charlie Brown's teacher. So, in order to be different, it's not about the website, it's not about the graphics, it's not even about the technology because so much of that, they're different versions, but so much of it is table stakes now. It's about personality, it's about trust, it's about comfort, and it's about having some awareness. Maybe there's name awareness. Well, our firm is not a household name. It was for a while at my house, but that's it. Generally, it's not a household name. So people might have heard of us or they might not. They might see that our name is on the building. They might not. That's not how people make big financial decisions. No one's going into, remember years ago it was the yellow pages. No one goes into a yellow pages or a Google drive, a Google search or whatever, and blindfolds themselves and goes, eeny, meeny, miny, you're my new financial advisor. That's just not what
Mhm.
happens.
Mhm.
Most financial advisory comes from referrals, and referrals, which come from introductions from other advisors or other clients or other people, are much easier when you have collateral that you can share with folks in advance. So even if someone's never seen your podcast, the fact that their neighbor, friend, coworker, boss, whatever says, you really ought to talk to our team at BFG or whatever. If they say that and they check you out and there's some content that they can go to, you become a human being rather than just the phone number or the email address that their friend gave them. It
Yeah.
makes you more relatable. And then they can call and say, hey, Eric, I saw I saw an episode of Don't Retire, Graduate, or I read part of your book or blah, blah, blah. I'd love to schedule some time to talk to you. And it's a different experience than hi, my name is. And how do you work and what do you do? Like we've already shared some of that.
Mhm.
So I think brand awareness is less about, I think it's less about name recognition because so many people have their firms with their own name on them, or it's a firm with, law firms do this all the time. There's 7 names on them and they shorten it to just the one, and you don't know who the partners are these days. Or everybody sounds, everything is clear, or everything is holistic, or everything, all the buzzwords, they're all the same. So to be truly different and to stand out from a brand standpoint, to me, it's less about name recognition and more about having something people can be referred to other than just your website. If I
Yeah.
ask people to go to our website, they're not going to. If I offer them meaningful content, something free, something valuable in a podcast episode, they might download it and get to know us a little bit before they would ever go to our website. So you can tell me where I'm wrong, but that's the way I see it as a financial advisor. I'm wrong all the time at home. Why not at work?
Well, I want to support your point actually, and then I want to use you as an example.
Uh-oh.
But yeah, get ready.
Making an example of me, that's great.
It's a positive thing. Don't worry, Eric.
Okay, I'm
So
not worried.
I want to support your point that when someone says, hey, you should talk to BFG advisors, and the guy's name's Eric, someone will look you up, and that content that they see, whether they see your face on your podcast cover art, whether you are doing YouTube videos, whether you are active on LinkedIn, when someone searches your name, typically your LinkedIn profile is one of the top search results. So they
Hmm.
are likely going to click in and say, like, who is this guy? If you've
Yep.
never posted anything on your LinkedIn, who are you? I don't
Mm.
know. Do I trust you? Maybe not. But if I see a lot of content and I may not even click through and listen or know that it's good quality or anything else, but there's a level of credibility that's established there because your neighbor Joe told you and you saw some stuff online. So
Mm.
in your mind immediately, you're more likely to pursue that connection than you would if no one had recommended, and you're just doing a search for, advisory services, which I'm not
Yeah.
sure how often people actually search advisory services. Let's just throw that out there. They're typically searching for an answer to a question. And then where
Yeah,
I
and
want to
and,
be,
and I'll
oh, go
I'll
ahead.
say before you make an example of me, I will also say that when you do a search like that, there's so much
Mhm.
money being spent on the advertising to get to the top. You might not even be on your
Yeah.
name might not even hit there till the second page anymore. So few people are using it because it's got so watered down. And you're right. They want to ask a question about a Roth IRA or about a 529 plan or whatever it is. They're going to go on and look that information up, and it is far more likely that they're going to take that information, be armed with, and say, all right, now I need to find an expert and talk to their
Mhm.
accountant or their neighbor or whatever and say, who do you know who I can talk to about this? So go ahead.
Mhm.
You can now make an example of me. I'm ready. I'm sitting down. I'm
Well,
ready.
and the other piece of that, and I think what you said leads perfectly into the SEO, so we will circle back to that. But where I feel very strongly about brand awareness and recognition is not so much the name, like you said, but the visual that we receive with a name or a brand. So when I think of BFG, I think of the little blue and the green tree and whatever. Like I see your logo in my mind.
Hmm.
And while someone may not be searching BFG, they might be searching retirement tips
Mm.
or how do I find hobbies in retirement or themes around where they are headed. And that's where I think you've done a great job in branding the show, which I know it's not all you. We got to credit the team, but
100%.
branding the show and creating that word bubble and you with the graduation cap on and that whole theme is so catchy, right? So I want to encourage people anytime you are thinking about producing media, you're probably not going to produce it under your advisory services brand name. You're going to
Right.
create a catchy persona, different colors, different visuals, something that's a a theme or a thought that people can really feel like they can get behind. Like don't retire, graduate. Like heck yeah, I don't want to sit at home and be bored. I want to graduate to a new different cool life, right? And that
Yeah.
may or may not be sitting on the beach and kind of doing nothing because I'm going to get bored after like a week. So
Yeah.
think about the theme of where do my people want to go? What stage of life are they headed into? And what is something cool that we can, create a phrase that's catchy around?
Yeah.
And that's where I think you've done a great job creating your content under this um, exciting adventure type idea
Well, thank you.
versus, oh, this is the BFG Advisors podcast, right? Like that's no fun.
No, that's boring, and I want to be anything but boring. Do you know the story behind both the name and not the tree logo, but the show's logo? I don't know if you even know the story.
I don't know.
I was at FinCon in, I want to say, 2018, Dallas, I think,
Okay. Yeah.
and there was a caricaturist in the expo hall. And so I waited in line. I'm like, yeah, I'll get a caricature. That sounds fun. And I knew I was looking to start a book and I wanted to call it Don't Retire, Graduate. I had no idea I was going to podcast. I don't even think I knew what a podcast was at the time, candidly. I was at FinCon and didn't know what a podcast was. There's actually a video of me speaking at FinCon a few years later on our consulting site that I basically make fun of myself as a financial advisor trying to figure this out because I made every mistake you can, and so I can save all of you some trouble potentially. But nonetheless, so I said, would you do the caricature and just put me in a cap and gown? And they did. Now that it wasn't blue and green, that was later. Once we had company, and did some branding, we added the color and we added the thought bubble because that was what I'm thinking about as I'm thinking about not retiring. I'm thinking about graduating. But the caricature was a pretty random thing, and I said, just put me in a cap and gown. That'd be fun. Now I don't use the caricature as much as I used to because I look so much like Mr. Incredible in said caricature that it almost looks like
My
plagiarism.
favorite part.
I am in fact not Mr. Incredible. The striking resemblance is purely pure. That's purely coincidental and not intentional. But so we did change sort of the look of the book itself and the podcast so that it was more obvious what it was. Because
Mm,
here's the other thing: when you say "don't retire, graduate," and there's a cap and gown on the front, people think it's
mm,
about school,
mm,
and it's not. So actually, some of the visuals we started with turned into sort of mistakes, and while it
mm,
created an identity, it
mhm,
didn't resonate the way we wanted it to. It skewed to a much younger audience who then didn't really relate to the content in the same way. 24-year-olds, most of them are not listening to my show unless they know the guest or there's some topic that's of interest to them. Our audience, which we now, after all these years, we can identify, we know who they are. Our audience is 45 to 65-year-old women. For some reason, that's our sweet spot. And there's a bell curve around that and everything else. But I think there are a lot of women who are, number one, interested in personal finance. Number two, expecting to reinvent themselves and realize they're going to reinvent themselves at the next stage of their lives, whether that's widowhood or whether they've never been married or whether it's just they're trying to figure out what their married life is going to look like at a later an age. And so our audience has skewed in a very interesting way that was not on purpose, but actually that's where the wealth management business is going. Wealth
mhm,
management, I mean, all of the studies show that the wealth transfer that's happening now, there's going to be far more wealth controlled by women than there already is. And by the way, for the gentlemen out there, the married fellas, your wife's in more control than you are anyway already. You just admit it and move on. Her money's her money, your money's her money. Everything that's not. I can't say that. That's probably going to offend somebody. I'm teasing and I'm overgeneralizing, but the idea here is that the wealth management business is skewing toward women, many of whom are going to outlive their life partners, one way or
mhm,
the other, and are trying to figure this out. So, but yeah, the cap and gown was a cool idea, and it didn't work.
mhm,
So the blue and the green all merged in, and I appreciate you making an example of me, but I'm also happy to admit when something is not particularly successful. Um, the book's doing better now that it's got a piggy bank with a
mhm.
graduation cap on it. I'll do the shameless plug because why would I not? Now it's a piggy bank with a graduation cap. Now it's clearly about money because nobody thinks about pigs unless they're thinking about money or BLTs. So all right, let's move on to the
There
let's
you
move on
go.
to the let's move on
Well,
to
yeah,
SEO.
as we move on,
Yeah.
let's speak to that brand transition and
Hmm.
just throw it out there like that is allowed. I find that so many people hold themselves back from initially creating something and think like, well, I want to have a podcast, but it's just not perfect, or I don't know what to call it, or I don't know the branding, I don't know the colors. Whatever the thing is, you're creating barriers for yourself. And it
Hmm.
doesn't have to be perfect right off the bat. It can look professional. It can have a well branded appearance and colors and all those things. But you may get down the road and say, like, "Ah, I don't like this anymore." Or
Hmm.
it's not attracting the right audience or whatever. And you can change that and continue moving on. I've rebranded my show from Reaching Abundance to Podcasting for Financial Professionals because that is who I've been serving for the past 5 years. So it just makes sense.
We're
And
a
you
pretty tough
will.
target market, aren't we? We're a
No,
pretty
I
tough target
actually,
market.
this is my favorite market.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm glad. I'm
Yes,
glad to be
me too.
I'm glad to be squarely in your target market. That's exciting. You speak to me
Exactly.
every time you talk. You speak directly to me. All right, so
Perfect.
let's talk about how we can get shows discovered because Talking
Yeah,
to an empty room is not something you would do necessarily at a seminar. If you had a seminar and no one showed
right,
up,
right.
you would probably not even speak unless I guess you were videotaping. But here, because the podcast isn't live, the podcast is something that people are going to catch on their own time.
Hmm.
If they know a show goes live every Thursday, they might catch it on Friday or they might catch it on Monday. But then there's also those people who catch your show by accident. So let's talk about, or it's not an accident, it's something they're looking for, but they didn't know it existed. And that's sort of what the search engine is designed to do. So let's talk about that because that's way out of my pay grade.
Yeah, so go back to what we were touching on earlier is people are not searching advisor near me or advisory services. They are searching what's the Roth IRA contribution limit or various questions that they are personally facing that they either can't remember the answer to or maybe the laws changed, there's something updated, or maybe they're just in a life stage transition and they want to hear conversations around it. But it's
Mhm.
important that you create episodes, whether it is a guest interview or it's a solo episode, whatever style you choose to do, and that what's included in that episode is highlighted by the title of that episode. So that if
Mhm.
I'm searching for guidance with my IRA, your episode is somewhere on those search results. That is the goal of SEO. So you want to name your episodes something that is being searched for. And there's
Hmm.
plenty of SEO research that can be done about that. That's something that we do for our clients when we're creating all the written material for episodes. So you don't have to be an expert at SEO, just like Eric admitted he's not. He's got a team that's doing
No,
that
I
for him.
know for anyone who's been here the entire webinar, I know more about raccoons than SEO, just for the record. I just wanted to tie that in. It felt important. It felt like one more opportunity. And if you missed the beginning, go back to the beginning. There's a raccoon on the show.
Yep, got
Sorry,
to
go
catch
ahead.
that replay. But yes, you
Yeah.
want the primary way that you can show up in people's search results is by your show name. So we talked about that already, is that
Mm.
you're not going to name your show based on your firm. You're going to name your
Right.
show by using a concept that people are excited about or that they can get behind or a phrase that they feel is true about themselves. They're happy to jump in.
Hmm.
That's the first way you can rank. The next way is your titles of your episodes. And then the third way is the descriptions of
Mm.
what you talked about in your episodes. So that is typically called show notes or a show description. But there are lots of written, and this is something that I don't think people realize, but there are lots of written pieces that belong and have to be done basically with every single podcast episode. So every time you're publishing what you think is just audio or video as far as a recording, there's all this written element that goes with it. And Eric mentioned the transcript earlier. That is generally a piece that we pull that gets submitted to compliance. And inside that transcript is a ton of what I call SEO juice. And so when you are publishing either in a podcast hosting platform, so it goes out to all the apps, or even in YouTube, there's a transcript feature in the back end of that where you can, like YouTube pulls your transcript automatically within the app. There's nowhere that you
Mm.
would see it, but it is happening because they are searching through your content. But in podcast hosting platforms, you can copy and paste your transcript in there, which I highly recommend because there again, what do you think happens when people search for something? If you happen to say that exact phrase
Yeah.
naturally in your show, your episode's going to show up when they search. And then
So
the next,
what are these platforms? Because I know you're about to get to that, and I think everyone knows what YouTube is, and most
Mhm.
people know Spotify and maybe Apple Podcast, but there are others, and I don't
Oh,
profess to be an expert, but they're everywhere. So, how do you know, first of all, how to connect with your audience and what platforms to be on, and how do you do that? Because that sounds like work, and I don't want to do that.
Yes, I agree. So there are 20 something different podcast apps
Hmm,
out there available across the world. Some are more popular in certain countries or regions than others. And of course, we're all going to just generally rely on the top few: Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Then you have, Castbox and Listen Notes. And there, like I said, there's like 20 of them. Your podcast manager will post your episodes to a single place called a podcast host account and connect everything in the back end of that to naturally push out to all the platforms. So, no, you don't have to do that work. It happens for you automatically through the management process.
okay.
And um, one thing I was going to mention is you asked about, well, okay, like how do I interact with, like, where are these people? How do I know where they're tuning in? You will receive stats out of your podcast host account where you can see, oh, like 80% of my listeners are on Apple Podcasts. Cool. Or Spotify or wherever. You will
Mhm.
see those metrics and be able to lean into those platforms. The interesting piece, yet challenging piece, is that inside a podcast app, there's not really a way to directly interact with people. So, say I love your show, but when I'm in my podcast app, I can't necessarily send Eric a message, right? it There's a little bit of a disconnect there, which is why it's super important that you're always driving them to your website, a lead magnet, your LinkedIn, like wherever they can connect with you. And then where you should be active is where you're comfortable being active. If I tell you you have to be active on Facebook,
Mhm.
but you don't like Facebook and it's a chore and a challenge and you don't have time for that, and maybe it raises your blood pressure when you log in, then guess what? You're never going to do that, so it's never going to work. You need to be active on a platform, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, like wherever you're happy and excited to interact with people, and tell people that's where you're going to hang out. That's one of the most important things of media and influence and all of these things, is to stay in a lane that you're comfortable in, that still challenges you.
Well, first of all, I'm glad to know you and to know your work and to know that there are people like you who make people like us look good. Because financial advisors, we know our stuff, we don't know that. And
Mhm.
not most of us should not try. Really,
Mhm.
I really don't think that's not the best use of my time any more than anything. I don't need to know how to do my own root canal either. I have a dentist for that, and he does a fine job. So. We are going to give away some free information, and I'm going to pull those up here in a second. But I thought we should probably each close with one big idea, and then we'll talk about where folks can learn more about us. I'm happy to go first, or I will defer. What do you prefer?
Yeah. Well, I think my big idea that I would close with is to not wait. I think
Mm,
that's the biggest mistake that I see across the board. People come to me saying, "Gosh, I've had this podcast idea in my head for like 2 years, and it's a really great idea, and it's a really
mhm,
great show." And sure, they need some guidance on actually putting the content together, or what it should look like, or the branding, or the language around this idea that they've been sitting on. But
mhm.
they've been sitting on it for 2 years. Imagine how much traction you could have if
Yeah,
you had started, right? So that is across the board the biggest um, mistake that I see,
I think
quite
that's great.
frankly. And I've
That's great advice.
consistently seen that mistake for about 5 years. So,
It's great advice, particularly in an audience of financial advisors, where our best advice usually is don't wait. So it's very, very much similar to saying it's better to start planning for your
mhm.
financial future today than it would be to wait till tomorrow. The same thing
Yeah.
is true with some of the marketing, the outreach, the podcasting, and so forth.
Mhm.
My one big idea for all financial advisors who are exploring this is to guest on a few shows before you try to do this yourself,
Mm.
because you will learn quickly what hosts are good at, what they're not good at, what makes a great show, especially if you're planning to do guested shows. Be
Mhm.
a guest on a couple of shows first. There's a service called Podmatch you can go on to find a way onto these. You can hire an agency. There are agencies who do this full time. Interview Connections is one that I think is fantastic for financial advisors, but there are others. If you want to, if you want to learn how to podcast, first be on enough of them and it might only be a month or two or three that you do this, but be on enough of them to understand what a guest is experiencing, so that
Mm.
when you invite a guest on, you can make sure that they have a great experience being in a conversation with you, so that they want to share this with their audience, because ultimately that is one of the top purposes of doing this, is reaching that broader audience. So that would be my one big idea. And I think if you do the two things that we just suggested, you'll be better off in a month, 2, 3, 5 than you are now. Here's some information you can get if you pull out your phones, go to the QR code. You want to talk a little bit about this, Virginia?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in going to conferences, I love a good conference, but I think the biggest challenge is that while you're there, you meet so many cool people and have so many ideas, and oh, I should do this, and let me write down that. And you come home with a bunch of notes, but it's really hard to take action on those notes and to actually keep in touch with all the cool people that you met. And so this free download will help you actually use the content that you've already created or that you're about to create if you haven't already started. And you can use that content to follow up with people. So most people don't realize to go ahead and send, the reel that you made last week to your new friend to say, "Hey, we were talking about this and it actually applies to you and tell me what you think." Right? And it can help support and form a simple message to somebody to help with your follow-up and to create lasting connections with people. So turning those conference connections into actual relationships.
I love it. All right, we have about 3 minutes left, so I'll go to the next one, and that is for all of the financial advisors who are watching or listening today. Check out Don't Retire, Graduate. Just see what it is that we've been doing. I promise you'll find it's not. It doesn't have to be technical. It doesn't have to be perfect. We all make mistakes. We're human beings. It's part of what humanizes us. But there's some very cool guests with incredible conversations and great stories, and it will help you come up with your own idea to do something. Don't copy mine, but come up with an idea that's uniquely yours, that is that describes what you like to do and the people you like to work with. And so please do check out the show. And of course, if you like it, reviews and 5-star reviews and so forth are huge for podcasters. That helps us get up in our rankings. So please check them out. Lastly, if you have interest in chatting with me further or Virginia further, you can use these QR codes to schedule. These are direct to our calendars. And Hannah, we have 2 minutes. Do we have any questions from the chat box today, or anything that we want to close with?
I just have one question. Virginia touched on it a little bit, but what are the most common mistakes financial advisors make when starting, and how can they avoid them?
Yeah. Well, the big one is not starting, right? And just
Mm,
holding yourself back. The other big one is being too reserved initially and almost being afraid to be yourself and show your personality and be weird, right? Like be yourself, because that is the biggest thing that people are looking for as far as creating a connection. I kind of want to know that you have this habit of, looking to the side or whatever the thing is. I'm gonna love and like you specifically because of your weirdness, not because you're copy and paste like everybody else. So
hmm.
be unique.
So you like me because of my weirdness? And
Yes.
actually, it's interesting. We did meet at a conference, so you must have used your toolkit. So the toolkit must work, because we did meet at a conference. Hannah, if there are no further questions, if anybody who's watching would like to raise your hand and do a quick last question, otherwise we'll close with, of course, this being a financial advisors show, we have to close with I think some disclosures, which I
Hmm.
don't see. They're here somewhere. I swear they're here. There it is. I knew
There
it.
we go.
There you go. Keep compliant. Always do the right thing when it comes to that. Virginia, this has been super fun. I thank you for participating with me. Podcasting has become such a big part of my life, of my profession, of our business, and the relationships that I'm building are lifelong. So thank you for being one of the most awesome humans I know, and for doing the work you do.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. This is great.
All right, everyone, take care. Have a great day. Bye bye
Take
now.
care.